There's a clay tablet sitting in a museum in Istanbul right now. It is roughly the size of your hand. It is cracked, chipped, and missing large pieces of its text. Archaeologists dug it out of the ground in Iraq in the 1800s. They logged it. They stored it. And then, for over 100 years, almost nobody looked at it seriously. It sat in a drawer, essentially forgotten, while scholars moved on to bigger, flashier discoveries. But here is what nobody realized, or maybe what some people realized and quietly set aside. This broken, half-destroyed piece of clay contains one of the oldest descriptions of divine imprisonment ever recorded by human hands. It names beings who were bound. It describes what it cost the entire world when those bindings happened. And it tells us that the gods themselves could not, or would not, do anything to stop it. This is not mythology in the way we usually think about mythology. This is not a story ancient people made up to explain the rain or the harvest. What is written on this tablet is a cosmological record, a theological document, a description of how the universe actually works, at least according to the people who built the world's first cities, invented writing, mathematics, and the concept of law itself. The Sumerians were not primitive. They were not guessing. They were writing down what they believed to be absolute, terrifying truth. And what they believed was this: some beings in this universe are bound, imprisoned, held in a realm from which there is no return. And the reason they are bound is not random. It is not accidental. There are rules, ancient, cosmic, unbreakable rules, and when you violate those rules, even if you are a god, you get taken, you get held. And the world above suffers every single day that you remain imprisoned below. Let that sink in for a moment before we go any further. The tablet we are talking about is catalogued as Ni 12501. It dates to approximately 2400 BCE, placing it in what scholars call the early dynastic 3B period, a time when Sumerian civilization was at the height of its first great flowering. The city-states were powerful, the temples were enormous, the priests were literate, and the scribes were recording everything. This tablet was found in Nippur, which was the religious capital of Sumer. Not a political capital, but a sacred one, the city of Enlil, the king of the gods, the place where divine law originated. When a scribe in Nippur wrote something down, they were not writing fiction. They were preserving sacred knowledge. They were recording what the gods had revealed, what the priests had transmitted, what the cosmology demanded be remembered. Ni 12501 was written in that context. It was meant to last forever. It was meant to be known. The fact that it was nearly lost is in itself extraordinary. Now let us talk about what it actually says, because this is where it gets deeply strange and deeply important. The tablet opens not with darkness, not with war, not with catastrophe. It opens with abundance, with life so full and rich that it almost hurts to read about it. There are rivers teeming with fish. There are herds of cattle, multicolored cattle, the text says, which is a specific and deliberate detail, roaming across green landscapes. The world is functioning exactly as it should. Everything is in its right place. And at the center of this abundance stands Ishkur. Now, Ishkur is the Sumerian storm god. He is the son of Enlil, the king of the gods. In southern Mesopotamia, where most of Sumerian civilization was concentrated, storm gods were not the most central deities. The land was irrigated by rivers, not rain. But Ishkur's power was still cosmic and vast. He commanded the storms, the rain, the thunder, the flooding rains that could either destroy or renew. He was a god of real physical power, a god whose presence meant life and whose absence meant death. Rivers stop flowing. Animals cannot find food. Newborns die before they can even take their first full breath. The agricultural foundation of the entire civilization, the thing that made Sumerian cities possible, that made writing and mathematics and law possible, begins to collapse, because the storm god is bound, because something in the realm below has hold of him, and nothing above can simply demand his release. Think about what that means cosmologically. This is not a story about a hero who slays a monster and saves the world. This is a story about a god, a genuinely powerful, cosmically significant god who gets taken and whose taking causes cascading catastrophe across the living world. This is a story that says the underworld is not just where the dead go. It is an active force. It reaches up, it pulls things down. And when it takes something it should not have, the living world pays the price in the most immediate, brutal way possible. No rain, no rivers, no food, no new life. Now here is where it gets even more extraordinary. When Enlil, the king of the gods, the most powerful divine figure in the entire Sumerian pantheon, the lord of Nippur itself, when Enlil discovers that his son, Ishkur, has been taken, he does not simply go and get him back. He cannot. The text makes this explicit in the most devastating way imaginable. He calls the divine assembly. He gathers all the gods, the Anunnaki themselves, and he stands before them and asks, begs, essentially, for someone to go into the Kur and retrieve Ishkur. And the gods do nothing. And she descends into the underworld, deliberately. But even her deliberate voluntary descent does not protect her from what happens there. She passes through 7 gates. At each gate, she is stripped of one of her divine attributes, her crown, her jewelry, her garments, her rod of power, until by the time she stands before Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, she is naked and powerless. Every layer of divine protection removed, every cosmic attribute stripped away. And then Ereshkigal and the 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki, sitting in their divine capacity as arbiters of death, fix their gaze upon Inanna. This gaze is called the Eye of Death. It is not metaphorical. In the text, it is a specific, technical action. The Eye of Death is followed by the word of wrath and the cry of condemnation. And Inanna is killed. The goddess, who is the queen of heaven and earth, who has more temples dedicated to her than almost any other deity in the ancient world, is killed in the underworld and hung on a hook like a piece of rotting meat. She hangs there for 3 days and 3 nights. Now here is the theological point that the Sumerian scribes were making, and it is exactly the same point that Ni 12501 makes with Ishkur. The underworld does not recognize rank. It does not honor divine status. It does not make exceptions for the powerful or the beloved. Its laws apply universally, and violation of those laws, even by a goddess at the peak of her power, results in binding, imprisonment, death. Inanna's crime was, in a sense, hubris. She entered the underworld as if she could simply walk through it by virtue of who she was. She sat on Ereshkigal's throne, defying the queen of death in her own domain. That act of defiance triggered judgment. The Anunnaki did not deliberate long. They struck her with the Eye of Death immediately. The only reason Inanna does not remain bound forever is because of an extraordinary act of cosmic bureaucracy. Before she descended, she told her faithful servant Ninshubur, "If I do not return in 3 days, go to the gods and beg for help." Ninshubur does exactly that. She goes to Enlil, who refuses. She goes to Nanna, the moon god, who also refuses. And then she goes to Enki, the god of wisdom and water, the most cunning of the divine council. And Enki does something remarkable. He does not send a warrior. He does not organize a rescue army. He creates, from the dirt under his own fingernails, 2 tiny beings, the Kurgara and the Galatur, who are neither male nor female, neither fully alive nor fully dead. They are liminal creatures, existing at the boundary of categories, which means the underworld's rules apply to them differently. He gives them the food of life and the water of life, and sends them in. Notice the parallel with the fox in Naidu 12501. In both cases, the rescuer is not powerful in the conventional sense. In both cases, the rescuer works through cunning, through liminality, through an understanding of the underworld's rules that allows them to navigate those rules rather than simply overpowering them. In both cases, what saves the bound being is not force. It is intelligence applied at exactly the right pressure point. But even after Inanna is revived, she cannot simply leave. The underworld has a rule that makes Ni 12501's binding mechanism look gentle by comparison. No one leaves the core without sending someone to replace them. The underworld's population must remain constant. If a living being escapes, a living being must be sent back in exchange. The Gala demons, the enforcers of the underworld, sexless, relentless, without mercy or family ties, follow Inanna back into the world of the living to collect their substitute. They try to take Ninshubur. Inanna protects her. They try to take her sons Shara and Lulal. Inanna protects them too, because they were mourning her. And then she finds her husband Dumuzi, the shepherd god, sitting on her throne in magnificent clothing, showing absolutely no sign of grief at her supposed death. Inanna hands him to the demons without hesitation. Dumuzi tries to flee. He goes to his brother-in-law Utu, the sun god, who transforms him temporarily into a snake to help him escape. But the Gala are relentless. They find him. They seize him by the thighs, a specific, deliberate image in the text, and drag him down to the Kur. He is bound. He is imprisoned. He is taken because he violated the implicit cosmic law that says, when someone you love descends into death for the world, you grieve. His failure to grieve was his crime. His imprisonment was the sentence. And the world pays for it every year. During the months when Dumuzi is in the underworld and the land goes dry and cold, the shepherd god bound below while the herds above have no divine protector. This is the cosmology the Sumerians were transmitting. Binding is not random. Binding is the operation of cosmic law. You are bound when you violate the fundamental rules that hold the universe together, when you take without giving, when you enter forbidden realms, as if you are exempt from their laws, when you fail to honor the obligations that your cosmic position demands. And when divine beings are bound, the living world suffers, every time, without exception. The storm god is taken and rivers stop flowing. The goddess of love and war is taken, and all of her cities fall into lamentation. The shepherd god is taken, and the seasons turn cold, and the herds lose their divine shepherd. The binding of a cosmic figure always has physical consequences in the world of the living, because the Sumerians understood that the divine and the natural were not separate systems. They were the same system, operating at different scales. Now let us talk about the deeper structure here, because there is something in these texts that goes beyond narrative and into something that feels almost like a law of physics. The underworld, the Kur, is not simply a place of punishment. It is not a Sumerian version of hell, in the moralistic sense we are familiar with. The Kur is not where bad people go. In early Sumerian theology, everyone goes to the Kur. Every soul, regardless of moral conduct, ends up in the underworld after death. There are no rewards for the righteous and no extra punishments for the wicked, at least not in the early texts. The underworld is simply where existence ends, where all energy eventually returns, where the dead dwell in eternal stillness and darkness, eating clay and drinking dust. The realm is ruled by Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, who, in some traditions, was herself dragged down to the underworld by Kur in the primordial time before human memory. She rules it not as a demon or a villain, but as the necessary sovereign of a necessary realm. The underworld must exist. It must be maintained. It must have its queen. Without it, the cosmic order collapses, just as surely as when the storm god goes missing. The gate of the underworld is kept by Niti, the chief gatekeeper, loyal servant of Ereshkigal, who guards the 7 locked gates and ensures that nothing enters or exits without passing through divine law. His presence is not cruel, it is structural. The universe requires that the boundary between the living and the dead be maintained. Neti is the mechanism that maintains it. And the Anunnaki, those 7 divine judges sitting beside Ereshkigal, they are not villains either. They are the cosmic judiciary. They are the beings whose gaze constitutes final judgment, whose word of wrath is not personal anger but the operating of universal law. When they strike Inanna with the eye of death, they are not punishing her because they dislike her. They are applying the law she violated when she entered their realm with the arrogance of a conqueror rather than the humility of a supplicant. What makes Ni 12.501 so remarkable and so unsettling is that Ishkur appears to have done nothing wrong. He is not described as having violated a law. He is not said to have entered the underworld out of arrogance or curiosity or ambition. He is simply taken. He and his cattle are captured by the Kur, and the world above begins to die. This introduces something into Sumerian cosmology that the other texts do not quite capture in the same way. The terrifying possibility that binding is not always the result of transgression. Sometimes the underworld simply reaches up and takes things. Sometimes cosmic imprisonment is not a sentence. It is a seizure. And even the king of the gods, even the divine assembly, cannot stop it when it happens. That is the darkest message in these texts. Not that there are rules, and breaking them has consequences. That is frightening enough. But the darker message is that the rules are sometimes insufficient to protect even the righteous, even the powerful, even the beloved son of the King of Heaven. The Kur is not just a court of justice. It is also a force that reaches. And it can reach anything. The Sumerians who first scratched these words into wet clay were not trying to frighten themselves. They were trying to describe the world as they experienced it. A world where drought came without warning, where rivers dried up, where harvests failed, where children died before they could speak. They needed a cosmological framework that could accommodate that reality. And what they arrived at was this. The binding of divine powers is the mechanism behind natural catastrophe. When things are bound below, the world above breaks. And the only beings who can navigate the space between life and death are the ones who are clever enough to follow the rules while secretly working around them. This is why the fox matters so much. The fox is not just a clever animal in a story. The fox is the model for how conscious beings should navigate a universe that contains forces capable of binding even the gods. You do not fight those forces head on. You do not pretend they do not exist. You understand them deeply. You appear to comply with them fully. And you find the narrow, precise path through them that accomplishes what brute force never could. 4,400 years ago, a scribe in Nippur picked up a reed stylus and pressed these words into clay. They pressed them carefully, deliberately, in the sacred city of the king of the gods, in a tradition of writing that was already ancient by their time. They were transmitting something they believed to be true about the structure of reality, about what it means to be bound, about what it costs the living world when binding happens, and about the one kind of intelligence that can, perhaps, move through the most locked down places in the universe without being held. We do not know if the fox succeeded. The clay broke before the story finished, but the fox entered. That is what the tablet tells us. When every god in the divine assembly sat still and silent, when the King of Heaven himself could not simply command his son's release, when the rules of the underworld had claimed a cosmic power and were already showing what that loss cost the living world, the fox went in. It accepted the food and drink of the dead. It hid them away without consuming a single bite. It walked into the land of no return, carrying the full knowledge that everything in that place was designed to bind it forever. And it kept walking. That is the last image the tablet gives us. A small, clever animal moving through the most dangerous place in the Sumerian universe, carrying the rules in its mind like a map, and using them not as a cage, but as a path. The stone walls of the museum in Istanbul are silent around it now. The clay has been still for over 4 millennia, but the story it was trying to tell has never quite finished. Something is still bound below, the world above is still waiting, and somewhere in the structure of what these ancient scribes understood about the universe, the fox is still walking. Script word count, 3, 820 words. Tone, documentary. Suspense, authentic scholarship. Voiceover pacing, moderate. Allow pauses at paragraph breaks.